I'm Charlotte Alter. I'm here with Alicia Garza, principal at Black Futures Lab and co-founder of Black Lives Matter. Alicia, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So can you start off by telling us about Black Futures Lab?
Yeah, the Black Futures Lab works to make Black communities powerful in politics. And a lot of the work that we do is really diving into what it means to make Black folks powerful in politics. One of the things that we did early on, we started our project with a project that we called the Black Census Project. And it is the largest survey of Black people in America in 155 years, where we went across the country and talked to Black folks from all different demographics to learn more about what it is that we experience every day in the economy, in our democracy, in our society, and bigger than that, what it is that we want to see done about it and what we want to see for our futures. That census project informed what we've released earlier this year, which is called the Black Agenda for 2020 and beyond. And it's a legislative advocacy agenda that looks at how we can make Black Lives Matter from City Hall all the way up to Congress. And so our work is really about investing in Black-led organizations across the nation to help them make Black communities powerful in politics where they are. But our work is also very much about making sure that Black people are not just at the table, right, but that we set the table. We really want to make sure that Black people are not just symbols, but that Black communities and our concerns become the substance of the rules that are organizing our communities every single day.
So in the Black Census project that you mentioned, was there anything that you found were there any results of the findings that were surprising to you that you didn't necessarily expect?
You know, one of the things that's so interesting is that every 4 years, candidates and elected officials come to our communities and they start talking to us about what they think we care about. And so if you were an alien who came from outer space and you were to ask yourself, what do Black people want? You would probably think that it's plates of soul food, right? And that we just care about criminal justice reform and maybe something about marijuana or cannabis legalization. But the fact is that, you know, according to the Black Census, the number one issue that kept people awake at night was low wages that were not enough to support a family, quickly followed by the lack of accessible and safe and quality affordable housing, and then, of course, quickly followed by the lack of access to quality and affordable healthcare. Unfortunately, though, Black folks are rarely engaged around those issues because we tend to approach engaging Black communities from a race-neutral perspective as opposed to a race-forward one. And in fact, when we make policies where we're trying to close the gap between the haves and the have-nots, we often do the same thing. We try to approach it from a race-neutral perspective as opposed to a race-forward perspective that looks specifically at what Black communities are experiencing every day and how that relates to the broader solutions that we're trying to advance around how to make sure that everybody has what they need to live well and to live with dignity. So the Black Census is important in the sense that it does actually tell us very much what Black people are concerned about. It tells us very much what Black people want to see for our futures. And it's interesting, you know, the number one thing that we heard when we were conducting this census was that nobody had ever asked these folks what they think, what they experience, or what they want. And that does not bode well for democracy in America. So we have set out to change that.
Wow. I'm curious, how has this work changed in the last several months? You know, we're in a time of uprising, and I'm wondering, you know, obviously you've been doing this work for years, but what have the last several months been like in terms of ensuring that Black communities get to set the table, as you put it?
Well, it's been really wild. I don't think any of us knew that we would be in a whole new round of rebellion this year, on top of, you know, dealing with the Rona and on top of kind of moving into an economic recession. And then on top of that, right, a massive crisis in our democracy where we have a president who is attacking our ability to make decisions over our own lives and attacking things like the postal service, which we absolutely need in the time of a global pandemic. And so, For me, what I see happening right now, what's different, what has changed is that there are incredible conversations happening now across the nation about what safety looks like and security and dignity looks like in Black communities and what it doesn't look like. And I don't think I've seen a conversation of this magnitude in my lifetime where people are talking about divesting from policing, divesting from the practice of a punishment economy and turning towards an economy that is caring and an economy that is more connected and an economy that essentially fosters connection and interdependence as opposed to fosters individualism, right? And predatory practices and survival of the fittest kind of a mentality. But what is also true is that this is a complicated and dangerous conversation to be having in an election season. It's not dangerous because it's bold. It's dangerous because we can actually achieve a new way of being if we keep organizing and keep fighting. However, one of the things that we're really focused on at the Black Futures Lab and the Black to the Future Action Fund, which is like a political arm of our organization, is making sure that folks understand the importance of this election, not just in relationship to who's at the top of the ticket, but in relationship to the issues that we care about. Policing is very much on the ballot. When you go to vote for your mayor, you are also voting for who the chief of police is going to be in your community. When you are choosing your senators, right, and your Congress people, you are very much choosing who is going to represent you as it relates to bills that are moving through Congress right now, whether it be the HEROES Act or whether it be justice in policing or whether it be the newly designed BREATHE Act, right, which is coming to fruition from the movement for Black Lives. And so I just think that it's important for us to recognize that in this moment of rebellion, it is also very important to ensure that we use this election cycle as an opportunity to make our mark and to demonstrate, right, how many people we have organized over the last 7 years of this movement, and how many people we have gotten onto our side. Every single election season, I hear the same thing, which is that people feel a level of apathy, but they also feel a level of disconnection from the political process. And so what we've set out to do is to engage people in the decisions that are being made about us without us all the time. So from, advocacy around the HEROES Act and putting forward what we're calling a COVID-19 plan for Black America for relief and recovery, where we are looking specifically at the legislation that's coming out of Congress and making sure that it's strengthened so that Black people can have access to relief and recovery, all the way up to the Black agenda and trying to make sure that the Black agenda for 2020 is the organizing principles of the political parties, right, that want to represent us. What this moment offers us an opportunity to do is to wield our power at the polls. And so that's what we're really focused on. And that is something that I think is certainly different from 7 years ago.
Yeah. And so what about, this idea of, to what extent do movement politics and electoral politics, to what extent are those connected? Because a lot of times the things that a movement is pushing for may not necessarily be the things that, a politician thinks is going to win them the election. And we're seeing that even right now with Joe Biden, who has been vocally supportive of Black Lives Matter, however, has not embraced some of the fundamental demands of the movement, including defunding the police. So how do you kind of reckon with that contradiction?
These are big questions. So let me start.
Sorry.
No, it's good. It's a great question. So let me start from a historical perspective, which is that there has always been this tension, right, between, how it is that we move power at the polls and how it is that we move power in our communities. And frankly, they're in tension, but they're not in contradiction. There are so many tools that we need to activate for change. And every time I hear people kind of arguing over whether or not elections are important, I'm like, this is not the question that we need to be grappling with here. The question is, how do we use elections as a pivot point, as a pressure point, right? And as a way to continue to reshape the culture in which we are developing new rules and transforming systems. And so with the question of, who's at the top of the ticket right now and Joe Biden and his relationship to the movement, we have 100 days left to the election. And frankly, I think they're well aware that they are pretty far from the concerns that this movement has put forward, and that that's not actually acceptable, because this movement is not just about activists and protesters in the streets. I think what we saw in the streets and what we continue to see in the streets is that the crowds are growing and they are incredibly diverse. And everybody is paying attention to what Joe Biden is doing and saying in relationship to the issues of the current moment. He's still very far away from where he needs to be, and we still need to continue to push him to be a better candidate if he is going to be the presumptive nominee on one side of the ticket. But what's also real is that what's at stake here, if he doesn't choose to meet the moment, is that, again, we're leaving a lot of food on the table for somebody else to eat. And I say this all the time in the sense that, there are opportunistic forces that are also in motion right now. They are trying to, generate a lot of fear, a lot of insecurity, a lot of anxiety about the changes that are happening in this country right now. I often liken it to, the fight over segregation. There were a lot of people, right, at that time who would tell you that if we desegregated, right, that the world was going to collapse and we were all going to devolve into calamity. But in fact, what we found was that those kinds of changes were important for America to become who it is today. And we still have a ton of work to do. So candidates like Joe Biden that refuse to meet the moment, I think, miss an opportunity to be on the right side of history, but they also miss an opportunity to be an usher of the kind of change that they say they want to help advance. And so I think what we have right now is an opportunity not just to play it safe, but also not to think that just appealing to, a mythical kind of white working class voter in the Midwest is the primary concern for any campaign, when you see that actually Black Lives Matter is in the top issues of Democratic voters that Democratic voters care about across this country. And so again, it would be a missed opportunity for the Biden campaign to not step up to this moment. And I know they've made a few new additions that I think can help, help us get closer to that. But again, there does need to be a full orientation shift there. In the meantime, this movement is going to continue to organize people politically, to organize people practically, and to make sure that our voices are heard at the ballot box. And of course, we do need allies to do that, but we're going to do it, with or without Joe Biden. That's a fact.
So I want to get back to Joe Biden in a second, but you brought up segregation, and I was going to ask you about the civil rights movement. So I figured this is a good time. A lot of people have been comparing this era of rebellion to some of the most powerful moments of the civil rights movement. And I wanted to ask you about that comparison. How do you think what's happening right now is similar? And also, how is it different? And how are those differences embedded in the structure of these movements?
History is long, and, this struggle for civil rights, you can imagine it like Vincent Harding talked about. It's a long river with many different tributaries, and it's hard to compare and contrast different moments in time because time, place, and conditions are incredibly different. But what I can say is that this moment is actually an extension of times that have come before us. And it represents a learning of sorts, of lessons that have been so graciously offered to us, both by the documentation that people in the last period of civil rights did to, help light the way, but also for the people who, have been fighting for 50 and 60 years to see these kinds of changes, who are still alive. They're offering us important lessons today. One thing I will say that is noticeably different is the leadership of women, the leadership of queer and trans folks in this movement is much more prominent and much more celebrated. Certainly, Black communities are organized differently than we were in the last period of civil rights. And so this isn't to say, y'all got it all wrong, but there were some pieces that folk got wrong. And one of those pieces, right, was that, it was really focused on a very male, charismatic, cisgender, heterosexual, approach, right, to organizing and to social change. And besides being a bunch of labels there, I think what matters about that is that, Black people are not a monolith, and the concerns of our communities span every single issue that you can think of. And it is important that the leadership is coming from communities that are farthest away from the power, that actually need to be closest to it, as Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley would say. So I think that that's a major difference that we're seeing right now. I also think that there's a difference here in the sense of, there is not the same desire to appeal, right, to sentiments that want us to look a certain way, be a certain way, in order to gain respect, right? I think what this movement has shown us is that every single person is deserving of our humanity and of our dignity. We're deserving of being heard and our concerns being addressed, and that it shouldn't matter, right, if you have a nose ring or piercings, or if you prefer to wear a suit, right? that actually the message is much more important than the symbol. And so that is something that I think is a concrete shift as well.
What about simply the sheer number of leaders in this movement? You and I have talked in the past about how, there's often an image of the civil rights movement where you have Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, and their pictures are in the history books, and a lot of people think of that as a movement that was led by 2 or 3 men. And this is a movement where even in the last couple months, we've seen continuous, seemingly spontaneous organizing happening all over the country. People in Minneapolis starting rebellions at the same time that people in New York and people in California. So how has simply the sheer mass of this movement strengthened it and made it what it is?
Yes, certainly this movement has many, many leaders, and we call this a leaderful movement. But I think in relationship to your question here, in terms of the relationship between kind of spontaneous rebellion, right, and the advancement of new leaders, I think it's actually really important to kind of clarify that certainly rebellions can be spontaneous, but they are always undergirded and supported by work that has been in the works and in the making, and perhaps just not as visible as they are during moments of rebellion. For example, in Minneapolis, the Black Visions Collective has been organizing for quite a while now. And before that, they were organizing in different formations, pushing for a reimagining of public safety, pushing for a deeper investment in community needs and community supports. And it is during moments of rebellion that you actually start to see these leaders step forward and say, we have clarity on what the problem is, and we also have solutions to offer. A lot of times, because people have not been rooted in those places, or maybe just not paying attention to the work that those folks have been doing, we conceptualize these things as new and kind of coming out of the blue, when in fact it represents an ecosystem that has been growing and nurturing itself, right, and expanding for the last decade. And so what we saw this time around is actually the result, right, of an ecosystem that has been growing since at least 2013, certainly that was activated, right, at least in 2014, and that has built power between then and now. And so you are seeing the results and the fruits of what happens when we invest in Black organizing and invest in Black visions, right? That you start to see more and more Black folks stepping forward as leading some of these initiatives that are placing in our midst, right, new ways of understanding how our society can be organized, but also why that benefits us. So I'm really looking forward to the additional work that is coming out of Minneapolis, and I know they are taking on a huge task of completely reimagining what public safety can look like there. And that process, of course, is being led by women. It's being led by queer folks. It's being led by people who are gender nonconforming. It's being led by people who are migrants. These are the people who have been furthest from the power, but through the process of organizing, they are getting closer to it.
I'm curious about how your expectations for this movement have changed from what they were maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Do you feel like the future that you envisioned is closer? Has that vision changed? I mean, how has this been different for you personally compared to 2013?
Well, certainly I think I'm still processing a lot of this, honestly. As somebody who helped to create Black Lives Matter with my sister Patrice Cullors and Opal Tometi, I think that we envisioned this, but I don't know if we knew that 7 years later, right, we'd be at this place. And I was just on Facebook reading, the memories section where it like brings up your old posts. And Patrice, on this day, 7 years ago, tagged me in a post and said, Alicia Garza and I are embarking on a new project, and it's called Black Lives Matter. And she goes on to kind of describe what we had talked about in terms of our imagination for what it would look like to build the kind of organizing project that could bring Black people together from all of our different demographics to challenge state violence as it exists in our communities and to work together to build a world where Black lives actually do matter. And so I'm reflecting on that 7 years later and saying, wow, I don't think we had any idea what this would have and could have turned into, but certainly I'm so glad we did it. And, for me now, looking back, what I'm really grateful for is the opportunity to continue to reimagine what this world can look like and what this country can look like, and bringing Black folks into the fold to be able to be a part of that, to be powerful in that process, and to take on and take seriously, right, the questions of how it is that we organize ourselves in a way that is more just, that is sustainable, that is fair, and frankly, that gets us closer to the kind of freedom that we all deserve.
So, obviously this has been a really trying year, and it's been a year full of a lot of pain and uncertainty. I'm wondering, what gives you hope right now?
What gives me hope right now is change feels like it's very long, but actually the span of time is quite short. If you had asked me 2 months ago, wow, does 7 years feel like a long time? I would say, yes, it feels like a lifetime. But given everything that's happened with the Rona, I feel like I live a full year every single day, right? And so with that being said, what gives me hope is that I can see change in my lifetime. And that's what gets me up out of bed every single morning, especially when I don't want to. And it's what I fall asleep thinking about every night, that change can happen in our lifetimes. And so if that's true, right, what am I spending my time on every single day to make that change and to get closer to that change being a reality? That's what gives me hope.
Wow. Well, Alicia, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank
It's
you
really
for
an honor to
having
have
me.
you. Thank you.
This has been dope. Thanks.